The coffee pot trembled in Sophia's hand as she overheard the whispered conversation drifting from the corner booth. Three men sat huddled together, their eyes cold and calculating as winter frost on steel. Their voices were low, conspiratorial, meant only for each other, but Sophia's years of working in diners had taught her to pick up on conversations that weren't meant to be heard. The moment he orders his usual black coffee, no sugar, one of them murmured, his voice barely audible above the clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation from other patrons. "That's when we make our move." Sophia felt her blood run cold. The Steel Riders as president was about to walk through that door, completely unaware that three men were waiting to end his life with nothing more than a single, predictable routine as their trigger. Without thinking, without considering the consequences or the danger she was placing herself in, Sophia would lean close and whisper two words that would change everything, two words that would alter the trajectory of multiple lives in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. "Don't talk." The bell above the door of the Junction Café chimed its familiar melody as Sofia Ramirez refilled sugar dispensers for what felt like the 100th time that morning. It was a Thursday, and Thursday mornings at the Junction were usually predictable, quiet affairs. The regulars would shuffle in, order their usual breakfasts, read their newspapers, and shuffle back out into their ordinary lives. But today felt different somehow. The air carried a tension she couldn't quite name, couldn't quite place, like the static electricity that builds in the atmosphere just before a lightning strike tears through the sky. Sophia had been working at the Junction Café for 3 years now, long enough to develop an almost sixth sense about the place. She knew the regulars by name, knew their orders before they opened their mouths, knew which customers were just passing through and which ones would become fixtures at the counter. 3 years was long enough to understand the rhythms of this place, the ebb and flow of its daily life, the subtle changes in atmosphere that signaled when something was off. The café sat at the intersection of Highway 70 and State Road 19, a geographic quirk that made it a natural stopping point for travelers of all kinds. But more specifically, it had become a way station for motorcycle clubs traveling across the Northwest. The location was perfect, situated at the crossroads of major routes that connected cities and states, making it impossible for any serious rider to avoid if they were traveling through this part of the country. This particular Thursday morning, Sophia noticed 3 men who had taken up residence in Booth 9, the corner booth that offered clear sight lines to both entrances of the café. It was a strategic position, the kind of spot that people chose when they wanted to see everything and everyone who came and went. The 3 men had arrived separately over the past hour, which was the first thing that caught Sophia's attention. They didn't arrive together, didn't acknowledge each other at first, but gradually gravitated toward that same booth as if drawn by some invisible magnet. Their leather cuts, the vests that bikers wore to display their club affiliations, bore no patches whatsoever. No club insignia, no territorial markers, no indication of where they came from or who they rode with. In the motorcycle world, that was the equivalent of showing up to a formal event wearing a mask. It was suspicious, deliberately anonymous, and it set off alarm bells in Sophia's mind. She had served them once already, bringing coffee and breakfast platters that they ordered with curt nods and minimal conversation. But they barely touched their food. The eggs grew cold on their plates, the toast sat untouched, the bacon congealed in its own fat. Instead of eating, they spent their time watching the parking lot through the large plate glass windows, their eyes constantly scanning, always alert. The youngest of the 3, probably no more than 25 years old, had nervous eyes that darted around the room constantly. He kept checking his phone, glancing at the screen every few minutes as if waiting for an important message or confirmation of some kind. His leg bounced under the table with nervous energy, a tell that Sophia recognized from years of reading customer body language. The older man, built like a linebacker with shoulders that seemed too wide for the booth, had a neck tattoo of a serpent that coiled up from beneath his collar. He was the stillest of the three, but his stillness was the kind that came from absolute focus. He hadn't stopped staring at the main entrance since he sat down, his gaze fixed and unwavering, like a predator watching a watering hole. The third man, lean and wiry with a gray beard that spoke of years on the road, tapped his fork against his plate in a rhythm that made Sophia's skin crawl. It wasn't a mindless gesture but something more deliberate, like he was counting down to something, marking time until an event that only he and his companions knew about. "Order up. Sophia, table 6 needs a warm-up." Marco's voice cut through her observations. Marco ran the kitchen, had been running it for as long as anyone could remember. He was a fixture at the junction, as permanent as the building itself. Sophia grabbed the coffee pot, the glass warm in her hand, and began making her rounds through the cafe. Her path naturally took her close to booth 9, close enough to hear fragments of conversation if they were talking. And they were talking, voices low and intense. That's when she heard the words that would change everything. "The moment he orders black coffee, no sugar, we move." The serpent-tattooed man's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the relative quiet of the cafe, Sophia caught every word. "That's the signal. Axel always orders the same thing, same way, every single time. The second he says it, we finish this." Sophia's hand froze mid-pour, the coffee nearly spilling over the rim of the cup she was filling at a nearby table. Black coffee, no sugar. She knew exactly who they were talking about. There was only one person who fit that description, only one person whose Thursday morning routine was so predictable that assassins could use it as a trigger. Axel Blade Morrison, president of the Steel Riders Motorcycle Club, stopped at the Junction Cafe every Thursday morning at exactly 9:30 a.m. Regular as clockwork, as dependable as the sunrise, he would walk through that door, nod to the familiar faces, and take his seat at the counter. Always the same seat, always the same order, black coffee, no sugar, with 2 eggs over easy and wheat toast. And he always left a $20 tip, no matter how much his meal cost. Sophia knew Axel, at least as much as anyone could know a man like that. He was polite, soft-spoken when he wasn't addressing his club, and according to local rumors and whispered stories, one of the most feared and respected men in 3 counties. The Steel Riders weren't just any motorcycle club. They had history, they had power, and they had Axel Morrison leading them. The rumble of approaching motorcycles vibrated through the cafe's windows, the distinctive sound of Harley-Davidson engines growing louder as they approached. Sophia looked up from her coffee pot to see 5 bikes pulling into the parking lot, their riders wearing the unmistakable colors of the Steel Riders, a snarling wolf's head over crossed bones, rendered in silver and black on leather. The man at the front of the formation, leading the pack like an alpha wolf leading his family, was unmistakably the club's president. Even from a distance, even through the plate glass window, Axel Morrison commanded attention. He was maybe 50 years old, with silver threading through his dark beard in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old. His eyes, even from here, seemed to catalogue everything in a single sweeping glance, missing nothing, noting everything. Axel Morrison moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had survived things most people couldn't even imagine. There was no swagger, no bravado, just the simple certainty of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. 4 men followed him into the cafe, and Sophia watched as they took positions near the entrance and exits with practiced, military precision. These weren't random arrangements. Every man knew exactly where to stand to control the space, to maintain sight lines, to respond to any threat. Axel himself walked directly to his usual spot at the counter, the third stool from the end, the one with the slightly worn padding that had conformed to his shape over countless Thursday mornings. He nodded to familiar faces scattered throughout the cafe, touched his fingers to his forehead in a casual salute to old Beatrice, who had worked the register at the junction for longer than Sophia had been alive. "Morning, folks," Axel called out, his voice warm and commanding at the same time. It was the voice of a natural leader, someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "Beautiful day for a ride, isn't it?" Several customers looked up, smiling at the greeting. This was part of the Thursday morning ritual, Axel's impromptu greetings that somehow made everyone in the cafe feel included, feel seen. It was a gift, Sophia realized, this ability to make people feel like they mattered. But Sophia's attention was divided. She glanced back at booth 9, and what she saw made her heart sink. The three men had gone absolutely rigid. The serpent-tattooed man's hand had disappeared under his jacket, and Sophia knew with terrible certainty that his fingers were now wrapped around a weapon. The young one with nervous eyes had stopped checking his phone and was now staring at Axel with an intensity that was almost physical. The gray-bearded man's knuckles had gone white where he gripped his coffee mug, the tendons standing out like cords under his skin. "The moment he orders black coffee, no sugar, we move." The words echoed in Sophia's mind, a death sentence disguised as a simple drink order. Her blood turned to ice as she watched Axel settle onto his stool with the satisfaction of a man comfortable in his kingdom, a man who had no idea that his next words might be his last. Around him, his men maintained their positions, alert but not alarmed. They saw a cafe full of civilians and regular customers. They didn't see the three hunters in booth 9, weapons concealed, waiting for a specific phrase to trigger violence. Sophia watched in horror as Axel reached for his menu, though she knew he wouldn't really need it. He ordered the same thing every Thursday. It was a ritual, a comfortable routine in a life that was probably otherwise filled with chaos and danger. She could see the three men in booth 9 shifting position, hands moving toward their jackets with practiced smoothness that spoke of military training or years of criminal experience. In 30 seconds, maybe less, Axel would give his order to Marco or to Beatrice, and those words would trigger his own execution. Time seemed to slow down, the way it does in moments of crisis when every second stretches into eternity. Sophia could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the pulse in her throat, could sense the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Every instinct screamed at her to stay out of it, to keep her head down, to pretend she'd heard nothing. What business was it of hers if dangerous men wanted to kill other dangerous men? She was just a waitress, just a civilian trying to make rent and survive in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Getting involved in the business of motorcycle clubs was a good way to end up dead, or worse. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't just stand there and watch a man die when she had the power to prevent it. Maybe it was because of the way Axel had helped old Beatrice carry her groceries to her car last month when her arthritis was acting up. Maybe it was because she'd grown up in this town, where people still believed in looking out for each other, where community meant something. Or maybe it was simply because watching someone die when you could prevent it was something she knew she couldn't live with, couldn't carry for the rest of her life. Before she could second-guess herself, before fear could freeze her in place, Sophia moved. She glided toward the counter with smooth efficiency, coffee pot in hand, and a bright smile fixed firmly on her face. To everyone watching, to all the civilians and the Steel Riders members and even the three would-be assassins, she was simply doing her job, being the attentive waitress, providing good customer service. "Morning, Axel," she said softly as she approached, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "The usual today?" He looked up at her, and for a moment Sophia felt the full weight of his attention. His eyes were darker than she'd expected, intelligent and measuring, the eyes of a man who had learned to read people as a survival skill. There was depth there, complexity, danger and kindness existing side by side. "You know it, Sophia," he said, starting to form the words that would seal his fate. This was it. In seconds, maybe less, he would say, "Black coffee, no sugar," and the men in booth 9 would interpret that as their signal. They would draw their weapons and turn the Junction Café into a crime scene. People would die, innocent people who just wanted breakfast, who had nothing to do with whatever war existed between these men. Sophia leaned forward to pour coffee into the cup on the counter in front of Axel, bringing her face close to his ear. To anyone watching, and she knew people were watching, it looked like exceptional customer service, like she was being attentive and personal with a regular customer. "Don't talk," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely breath against his ear, barely a movement of air that carried sound. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Axel's hand, which had been reaching casually for his coffee cup, froze halfway to its destination. She felt him go absolutely still, every muscle in his body suddenly alert in a way that reminded her of a wolf catching a dangerous scent on the wind. His eyes snapped to hers, all pretense of casual friendliness gone, replaced by laser-focused intensity that seemed to look directly into her soul. For a heartbeat, for an eternity, the Junction Café held its breath. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, Axel lowered his hand and gave Sophia the smallest of nods, a gesture so subtle that anyone not looking directly at him would have missed it entirely. "You know what?" he said carefully, his voice controlled and measured. "I think I'll just take the coffee for now. Let me look at the menu a minute. Maybe I'll try something different today." Across the room, Sophia saw the 3 men in booth 9 exchange confused glances. The serpent-tattooed man's hand remained under his jacket, but uncertainty flickered across his face like a shadow. The young one checked his phone again, more frantically this time, as if the device might explain what had just gone wrong with their carefully laid plan. The gray-bearded man's eyes darted between Axel and his companions, trying to understand why their target had suddenly deviated from 3 years of established routine. Without the signal they'd been waiting for, without those specific words that were supposed to trigger their action, they were lost. Their plan had depended on predictability, on Axel following his routine exactly, and now that routine had been broken. Axel lifted his coffee cup slightly, inhaling the aroma, but instead of ordering his usual breakfast, he simply nodded to the room at large and took a contemplative sip. It was elegant, mysterious, and completely wrong for 3 would-be killers who needed him to say one very specific phrase. Sophia stepped back from the counter, her legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they would continue to support her weight. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd prevented a murder without anyone realizing what had just happened. Except Axel knew. As she moved away, returning to her duties as if nothing unusual had occurred, she could feel his gaze following her, could sense the questions building behind those dark, intelligent eyes. He was a man accustomed to reading situations, to understanding motivations, and right now he was trying to figure out exactly what had just happened and why his regular waitress had just whispered a warning that undoubtedly saved his life. And in booth 9, 3 very dangerous men were beginning to realize that their carefully laid plan, weeks or months in the making, had just crumbled to dust because of 2 whispered words from an unexpected source. The game had changed, though most people in the cafe didn't know there had been a game at all. Sophia moved through her duties on autopilot, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, while her mind raced with the implications of what she'd just done. She'd inserted herself into something dangerous, something that existed in a world parallel to her own but governed by completely different rules. She'd saved a man's life. And now she would have to live with whatever consequences came from that choice. Axel Morrison's fingers wrapped around his coffee cup like a drowning man clutching a life preserver, like the ceramic mug was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. Behind his practiced smile, behind the mask of calm confidence that he'd worn for so many years it had become a second skin, his mind was racing through possibilities and implications at breakneck speed. In his world, in the shadow realm where motorcycle clubs operated according to their own codes and laws, unexpected whispers from strangers usually meant one of two things: betrayal from within, or salvation from an unexpected source. The trick was figuring out which one fast enough to survive the experience. "Everything all right, boss?" Phantom, his vice president and oldest friend, appeared at his elbow as if materializing from thin air. To anyone watching, he was simply checking if his president needed anything, being attentive to Axel's comfort. In reality, Phantom's hand was resting inside his jacket, fingers wrapped around his weapon, ready to draw and fire in less than a second if necessary. "Perfect," Axel said, keeping his voice light and unconcerned. "Just appreciating the service here." Sophia's always been attentive. But nothing was perfect. Nothing was even close to perfect. In the corner of his eye, carefully not looking directly but using the peripheral vision he'd developed over decades of staying alive in dangerous situations, he caught movement from booth 9. The three men who had been sitting there with military stillness were now shifting restlessly, their carefully maintained cover of casual customers crumbling under the weight of uncertainty. One of them kept checking his phone, his movements becoming more frantic and obvious. Another kept glancing toward the exit, calculating distances and angles. The third, the one with the serpent tattoo that Axel had clocked the moment he walked into the cafe, kept looking back and forth between Axel and his companions, clearly trying to decide whether to proceed with whatever plan they'd concocted or abort and try again another day. "Phantom," Axel said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond his vice president's ears. "The three men in booth 9. You see them?" Phantom's eyes flickered toward the corner, a movement so subtle and brief that most people would miss it entirely. But Phantom had been reading situations and assessing threats since before Axel founded the Steel Riders. His gaze took in everything in a fraction of a second: the nervous body language, the untouched food, the leather cuts with no club insignia. "Yeah," Phantom replied, his voice as calm as if they were discussing the weather. "Been nursing the same drinks for over an hour. Ordered food they're not eating. No club colors. Arrived separately but gravitated to the same booth." Axel nodded fractionally. Men who didn't belong. Men with a purpose. Men who were here for him. The question was, how had Sophia known? How had a cafe waitress, a civilian with no connection to the motorcycle world that Axel knew of, detected a threat that even his experienced club members had missed? The waitress in question appeared again, this time at a table near booth 9. Axel watched her with new appreciation, noting how she positioned herself where she could hear conversations from the corner booth, where she could observe without seeming to observe. She was wiping down a table that was already clean, a task that gave her a reason to linger in that area. She's been listening, he realized. She overheard something. That's how she knew. His admiration for her quick thinking was tempered by concern. If she'd overheard enough to warn him, then she'd overheard enough to make herself a target. In the world Axel inhabited, witnesses were liabilities, and liabilities had a way of disappearing or ending up dead. In booth 9, the three men were standing now, dropping cash on the table with movements that suggested haste rather than casual departure. They moved toward the exit, but Axel caught the way the scarred man's eyes swept the restaurant one more time, cataloging faces, memorizing the layout. It was the look of a predator marking territory he planned to return to, the look of a man who wasn't finished, just delayed. Sophia was clearing a nearby table when they passed, and Axel watched her closely, reading her body language with the skill of a man who had survived by understanding people. He saw something that made his blood run cold and his protective instincts flare to life. She recognized them. More than that, she was afraid of them. Not the general unease that civilians might feel around dangerous-looking men, but something more specific, more visceral. The kind of bone-deep terror that came from knowing exactly what someone was capable of, from having seen or experienced violence firsthand. How did a cafe waitress come to recognize would-be assassins? What had she seen or lived through that taught her to identify predators at a glance? Phantom, he said quietly, coming to a decision that would alter multiple lives in ways he couldn't yet predict. I want you to have a conversation with our waitress. After closing. Find out what she knows, what she heard, and how she knew to warn me. Phantom nodded, understanding the unspoken implications. They needed information, needed to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. And they needed to protect Sophia, whether she realized she needed protection yet or not. Because in warning Axel, in inserting herself into this situation, Sophia had painted a target on her own back. The men in booth 9 would eventually figure out that their plan had been compromised, and when they did, they would backtrack through the events of this morning, looking for the weak link, the variable that had changed their carefully orchestrated assassination attempt into a confused failure. And they would find Sophia. The last customer left the Junction Café at midnight, an old trucker who lingered over his final cup of coffee before heading back to his rig. Sophia watched him shuffle out into the darkness, knowing with absolute certainty that she was now alone with the very people she'd been trying to avoid for the past 14 hours. The café after closing was a different place entirely. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across empty booths. The cheerful clatter and conversation of business hours had been replaced by a silence so profound that Sophia could hear her own heartbeat. Axel Morrison sat at the counter like a king holding court in an empty kingdom, like a general surveying his territory after a battle. His men had positioned themselves strategically throughout the space, Phantom near the front door, another man whose name Sophia didn't know by the kitchen entrance, cutting off any possibility of escape or retreat. Sophia. Axel's voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk, gentle but carrying an edge of command that suggested he was not a man accustomed to being ignored or denied. Come sit with me. It wasn't a request, not really, despite the surface politeness. It was an expectation, delivered by a man who assumed compliance as a natural state of being. She approached on legs that felt unsteady, like she'd been walking for miles rather than just crossing a familiar room. Up close, in the dimmed lighting, she could see the intelligence in those dark eyes, could see the way they catalogued every micro-expression on her face, every tiny movement of her body, reading her like a book written in a language only he could fully comprehend. You look tired, he said gently, and there was genuine concern in his voice that surprised her. It's been a long evening, hasn't it? Running on adrenaline for 14 hours takes a toll. Sophia said nothing, wasn't sure what she could possibly say that would make any of this better or easier. Now, Axel continued, his voice still gentle but with an undertone of steel, tell me why you told me not to talk this morning. Tell me what you heard. Sophia stared at her hands, at the way her fingers twisted together in her lap. She could lie, could try to deflect, could pretend she'd simply been worried about him looking unwell or any number of innocent explanations. But lying was no longer an option, if it ever had been. Axel Morrison hadn't survived to become president of the Steel Riders by being fooled by bad liars. I heard them talking, she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silent cafe. The 3 men in booth 9. I heard them planning. What exactly did you hear? Axel's voice remained gentle, patient, like he had all the time in the world. They were waiting for you to say something specific. She forced herself to look up at him, to meet those intense eyes. They said, the moment he orders black coffee, no sugar, we move. Those were the exact words. They knew your routine, knew what you always ordered, and they were going to use that as their trigger signal. Behind Axel, Phantom's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet space. Sophia could see the implications registering on his face, the understanding of just how close they'd come to disaster. "You're certain of the words?" Axel asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Certain that's what they said?" "Yes. Absolutely certain." Sophia's voice gained strength as she spoke, fueled by the memory of her fear that morning. "They said you were predictable, that your Thursday morning routine never changed. Black coffee, no sugar, was the specific phrase they were waiting for. The second you said it, they were going to finish this. That's what they said, finish this." For a long moment, Axel said nothing. His face betrayed no emotion, but Sophia could sense the thoughts racing behind those dark eyes, the rapid calculations and strategic considerations of a man whose survival had always depended on staying 3 steps ahead of his enemies. "Why warn me?" he asked finally, and this seemed to be the question that genuinely puzzled him. "You don't know me, not really. Why not just stay quiet, keep yourself safe, let whatever was going to happen just happen?" "Because they would have killed you," Sophia said simply, as if this explained everything, as if there was no other possible response. "And probably everyone else who got in the way. Innocent people just trying to have breakfast. I couldn't just stand there and watch that happen." "You don't even know me," Axel repeated, studying her face as if searching for some hidden motivation, some angle he was missing. "I know enough," Sophia countered. "I know you helped old Beatrice carry her groceries to her car last month when her arthritis was acting up. I know you tipped Jamie, the busboy, $50 at Christmas because you'd heard his mom was sick and they were struggling with medical bills. I know you're polite to everyone who works here, that you treat us like human beings instead of servants. That's enough for me to know you didn't deserve to die over breakfast." Axel smiled, and it was the first genuine expression Sophia had seen on his face, the first crack in the armor of careful control he maintained. It transformed his face, made him seem younger, more human, less like the legendary figure of rumor and reputation. "You have good instincts, Sophia," he said warmly. "Better than most people who've been in this life for decades. But those instincts might have gotten you killed. You realize that, don't you?" Before Sophia could respond, her phone, sitting on the counter where she'd left it while cleaning up for the night, buzzed with an incoming message. Without thinking, operating on the automatic response to check her phone that was second nature in the modern world, she glanced at the screen. And her face went white, all color draining away as if someone had pulled a plug. "What is it?" Axel's voice sharpened, going from warm to dangerous in the space of a heartbeat. With trembling fingers that didn't want to cooperate, Sophia picked up her phone and showed him the message. "Unknown number, untraceable," but the words were clear enough. "We know who you are. We know where you live. We know where your sister works and which school your nephew attends. This isn't over. You should have kept your mouth shut." The transformation in Axel was instant and terrifying. One moment he was the somewhat gentle, concerned man asking questions, and the next he was something else entirely, a predator, a commander, a man who had built an empire through force of will and wasn't about to let anyone threaten what he considered his. He snapped his fingers, a sharp sound in the quiet cafe, and his men moved with military precision, each one instantly alert and ready for action. "Phantom, we're taking her to the compound now. Full lockdown protocol. I want 3 vehicles, alternate routes, counter-surveillance on every leg of the journey." He turned to Sophia, and his voice, while still controlled, left no room for argument. "Pack a bag. Essential items only. You have 10 minutes. What? I can't just, Sophia started to protest, but Axel cut her off. You don't have a choice anymore, Sophia. The moment you warned me, you made yourself a target. The moment they sent that message, they declared their intentions. He stood up, towering over her, but his hand on her shoulder was gentle, almost reassuring. You're under my protection now. That's not negotiable. But my apartment, my job, my life, will all be here when this is over, Axel said firmly. But only if you're alive to come back to them. Do you understand what that message means? They know where you live. They've probably been watching you all day, following you, learning your routines just like they learned mine. If you go home tonight, you won't wake up tomorrow morning. The blunt words hit Sophia like a physical blow, but she couldn't deny their truth. She'd heard enough in Booth 9, had seen enough in the cold eyes of those three men, to know that Axel wasn't exaggerating for effect. What happens now? She asked, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. Axel's smile was sharp and cold, the smile of a predator baring its teeth. Now your new friends are about to learn something very important. They're about to learn why you don't threaten what's mine. Why you don't make war on the Steel Riders. And why Axel Morrison didn't survive to be president of this club by being easy to kill. He gestured to Phantom. Get her somewhere safe. I'll make the calls. By morning, I want to know everything about those three men, who they are, who they ride with, who sent them, and what hole they crawled out of. As Phantom gently but firmly guided Sophia toward the door, Axel pulled out his phone and began making calls, his voice low and commanding, setting in motion the machinery of his organization, calling in favors and activating networks that most people didn't even know existed. Sophia's life as she'd known it was over. What came next was something she couldn't even imagine. But she was alive. For now, that would have to be enough. 3 days after the incident at the Junction Café, Sofia Martinez stood in the main hall of the Steel Riders compound, still trying to process how completely her life had transformed in less than 72 hours. The compound itself was something out of a movie, or maybe a military installation. 20 acres of secured property on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls topped with security cameras that tracked every movement, every approach. The main building had been a factory once, decades ago, before the Steel Riders bought it and converted it into their headquarters, their fortress, their sanctuary. Inside, it was surprisingly organized and clean, nothing like the stereotypical biker clubhouse Sophia might have imagined. There was a common area with comfortable furniture, a full kitchen that smelled of fresh coffee and whatever was being prepared for dinner, and a garage that housed dozens of motorcycles in various states of repair and customization. Upstairs were private rooms, offices, and what Phantom had called guest quarters when he'd shown Sophia to her temporary accommodation. The past 72 hours had been a blur of movement and adjustment. She'd been shuttled from the cafe to a safe house, then to another location, then finally here, to the compound. Always surrounded by Steel Riders members, always protected, but also always watched, always under scrutiny. They were friendly enough, these dangerous men who'd become her reluctant guardians, but Sophia was acutely aware that she was a civilian in their world, an outsider who'd glimpsed things she wasn't meant to see. You look nervous, Phantom observed, appearing beside her with the unnerving quiet that seemed to be his trademark. For a man his size, he moved like a ghost, which perhaps explained his road name. Wouldn't you be? Sophia countered, trying to inject some levity into her voice and mostly failing. Phantom's expression softened slightly, the closest thing to sympathy she'd seen from him. Yeah, probably. But you're safe here, Sophia. Safer than anywhere else right now. Nobody gets into this compound that we don't want here. Nobody gets to you without going through all of us first. Before Sophia could respond, Axel entered the main hall, carrying rolled maps under one arm and wearing an expression of grim determination. He looked like he hadn't slept much in the past 3 days, but his eyes were alert and sharp, missing nothing. "Sophia," he said by way of greeting. "We need to talk. Conference room, now." The conference room was all business: a large table, multiple screens on the walls displaying what looked like surveillance footage and maps, and several Steel Riders members already present, including Phantom and 2 other men Sophia had been introduced to but whose names she was still trying to remember. "We're going to end this tomorrow night," Axel said without preamble, spreading maps across the table with practiced efficiency. "No more waiting, no more defensive posturing. We end it on our terms." Sophia had been expecting something like this. Men like Axel Morrison didn't hide from threats or run from danger. They confronted it head-on, eliminated it with precision and overwhelming force. That's how they survived, how they maintained their positions of power. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Axel looked up at her, something like approval flickering across his face. "Be yourself," he said, pointing to locations on the map. "Tomorrow night is the Dragon's Crest Rally. 5,000 riders from across 6 states, all descending on the fairgrounds for 3 days of bikes, music, and general chaos. It's perfect cover for what we need to do." Phantom leaned forward, adding to the explanation. "We've leaked information through carefully selected channels. Information that you'll be there, at the rally, under Axel's protection. Information that we're moving you to a new safe house afterward, and that you'll be vulnerable during the transition." "Bait," Sophia said flatly, understanding dawning cold and clear. "You're using me as bait." "Bait with very sharp teeth," Axel confirmed, his tone matter-of-fact, neither apologetic nor boastful. "They won't be able to resist. They're desperate now. Their original plan failed spectacularly, they exposed themselves, and they know we're actively hunting them. They need to finish this, need to eliminate you as a witness and use you to draw me out. The rally gives them the perfect opportunity, or so they'll think." He pointed to various locations on the map of the fairgrounds. "We'll have people at every exit, every access point. Counter-surveillance teams watching for their approach. When they try to isolate you, when they make their move, we'll have them completely surrounded. They'll walk into a trap thinking they're springing one." Axel withdrew a small device from his pocket, something that looked like a combination of a phone and a GPS tracker. "This is yours. Transmitter, receiver, GPS tracker accurate to within 3 feet. Audio link to our coordination team. You'll never be out of contact, never truly alone, even when it looks like you are." He met Sophia's eyes, and his expression was serious, honest in a way that demanded honesty in return. "I won't lie to you, Sophia. There's real risk here. Things can go wrong, variables we can't predict can change the situation. But this is the only way to end it completely. Otherwise, you'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life, waiting for them to try again." Sophia thought about the messages that kept finding her phone despite changing numbers twice. Thought about the photos they'd sent of her apartment building, of the cafe, of her sister's workplace. They were thorough, professional, and determined. Axel was right, this didn't end until they were eliminated as a threat. "What happens after?" she asked. "Assuming this works, assuming we all survive, what happens to me?" Axel leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You saved my life, Sophia. In my world, in the world I come from, that creates bonds that don't break easily. You'll always have my protection, the protection of the Steel Riders. But protection comes with obligations, with expectations. You become part of our extended family, part of our circle. That's not a small thing. The weight of those words settled on Sophia's shoulders like a physical burden. She was being offered entry into a world that operated by its own rules, offered protection and belonging but also danger and obligation. There would be no going back to her old life, her old anonymity. That girl had died the moment she whispered, "Don't talk." "When do we start?" she asked, making her decision, committing to a path she couldn't fully see. Axel's smile was sharp as a blade, dangerous and satisfied. "Tomorrow night. The rally starts at sunset. By midnight, this will all be over, one way or another." The Dragon's Crest rally grounds vibrated with the combined thunder of 5,000 motorcycles, the sound like continuous rolling thunder, like a storm that never quite broke. Sophia moved through the crowd dressed in jeans and a borrowed leather jacket, feeling every inch the part of a biker's old lady, the term of art for a club member's romantic partner. The rally was overwhelming in its scale and intensity. Everywhere she looked there were motorcycles of every make and model, leather-clad riders comparing machines and swapping stories, vendors selling everything from bike parts to biker-themed jewelry. Multiple stages hosted live music, and the smell of grilled food and beer hung heavy in the evening air. "Breathe," Axel murmured, his hand warm and reassuring on her shoulder. They were playing their parts perfectly, the club president and his new girlfriend, enjoying the rally like any other couple. But Sophia could feel the tension in Axel's body, could sense the constant awareness of their surroundings, the way his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging faces and positions. "You're doing great. Just stay relaxed, natural." "I can feel them watching," Sophia whispered, the sensation like insects crawling on her skin. Southeast corner, Phantom's voice crackled in her nearly invisible earpiece, so small and well concealed that nobody would notice unless they were looking for it specifically. "Serpent Neck just arrived. He's alone for now, but that means the others are here somewhere too. They're splitting up, trying to approach from multiple angles." The rally was in full swing now, thousands of people moving in currents and eddies throughout the fairgrounds. Perfect cover for predators stalking their prey, perfect chaos in which to isolate a target and make them disappear. "In 5 minutes, I'm going to excuse myself," Axel said softly, his lips close to Sophia's ear so his words wouldn't carry to anyone nearby. "Going to the bathroom, getting another beer, something mundane. You'll be alone for about 10 minutes, maybe less. That's when they'll make their approach." "Axel," Sophia said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "After this is over, assuming we all survive, will I ever be able to go back to being normal? Back to being just a waitress living a regular life?" His expression softened, became almost sad, and he touched her face with surprising gentleness. "There's no going back, Sophia. That door closed the moment you saved my life. But that doesn't mean there's no going forward, doesn't mean there's no future. Just a different one than you planned." Movement, Phantom's voice crackled again. Serpent Neck heading toward the maintenance area behind the south stage. Greybeard spotted near the vendor section, moving in the same general direction. "We don't have eyes on the young one yet, but he's probably already in position." Axel squeezed Sophia's shoulder, his touch reassuring despite the danger they were walking into. "It's time. Remember, you're never alone out there. We have eyes everywhere, teams positioned at every access point. Just play your part, and we'll handle the rest." He kissed her forehead with theatrical flair, playing the part of the protective boyfriend for anyone watching. "I'll be right back, darling. Don't go too far." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with the ease of someone who knew how to move unseen when necessary. Sophia waited for a beat, then began moving toward the maintenance area, following the script they'd rehearsed. The crowds thinned as she moved away from the main rally grounds, the music and conversation fading to a distant murmur. "I'm moving to position," she whispered, trusting that the sensitive microphone would pick up her voice even at that volume. "Copy that," Phantom replied, his voice calm and professional. "We have eyes on all 3 targets now. Young one is positioned between the maintenance sheds, trying to look casual and failing. They're moving into formation. Stay calm, Sophia. You're doing great." The maintenance area was nearly deserted, a stark contrast to the chaos of the rally grounds. A few motorcycles were parked here, bikes that had broken down during the ride to the rally or needed quick repairs. Sophia positioned herself near a beautiful custom Harley, pretending to admire the paintwork while her heart hammered against her ribs. "Nice bikes, aren't they?" Sophia turned, proud that she managed not to jump at the voice, to find Serpent Neck approaching from between 2 maintenance sheds. Up close, in the harsh light from the security lamps, she could see the details she'd missed at the cafe: prison tattoos on his knuckles, a scar that bisected one eyebrow, the dead, flat look in his eyes that came from years of violence. "Yes," Sophia managed, keeping her voice steady. "Beautiful machines. The artistry and engineering that goes into customization is really impressive." "Beautiful," he repeated, moving closer with predatory smoothness. "That's funny, considering you're about to come with me for a little conversation about your biker boyfriend and why you couldn't mind your own business." Behind him, materializing from the shadows like a ghost, which explained his name, Sophia thought with hysterical humor, the young nervous man emerged. In her peripheral vision, she caught movement as Greybeard cut off her line of retreat, the 3 of them forming a triangle that left her no obvious escape route. "I don't think so," Sophia said, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed into those words. "I don't think you have a choice, sweetheart," Serpent Neck said, reaching inside his jacket. His hand emerged holding a gun, the weapon appearing with practiced ease. But instead of continuing to draw the weapon fully, he froze. His eyes widened in genuine fear, all pretense of control evaporating in an instant. All around them, from between maintenance sheds and from behind parked vehicles, from positions that had seemed empty moments before, men in Steel Riders' colors emerged. They moved with military precision, weapons drawn, forming a perfect perimeter that left the 3 would-be kidnappers with no avenue of escape. There had to be at least 20 of them, maybe more, all armed, all positioned with overlapping fields of fire that would turn any attempt at resistance into immediate suicide. "Gentlemen," Axel's voice cut through the air like a blade through silk, cold and sharp and dangerous. He stepped into view, flanked by Phantom and 2 other large men Sophia recognized from the compound. "I believe you wanted to have a conversation. So let's talk. Drop your weapons. Now." For a moment, the tableau held frozen, predator and prey suddenly reversed, the hunters becoming the hunted. Then, slowly, with the inevitability of men who understood when they were beaten, the 3 assassins complied, their weapons hitting the ground with metallic sounds that seemed too loud in the sudden silence. "On your knees, hands behind your heads," Phantom commanded, his voice brooking no argument. They complied, and Sophia watched as Steel Riders members secured them with zip-tie restraints and efficiently patted them down for additional weapons, finding enough hidden knives and firearms to outfit a small army. Axel moved to stand in front of Serpent Neck, looking down at the kneeling man with an expression of cold calculation. "Now then. Let's start with the easy questions. Who sent you? Who do you ride with? And why were you hired to kill me?" 2 weeks after the confrontation at Dragon's Crest, Sophia sat in the same cafe where everything had begun, but nothing was the same. The Junction Cafe had undergone subtle transformations in the intervening days. The security cameras were new, much more sophisticated than the old system. The panic button behind the counter connected directly to the Steel Riders compound. And there were always at least 2 club members at the counter, a constant presence that served as both protection and advertisement. Sophia herself was different too. She moved with more confidence now, aware of the weight of the medallion she wore on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her work shirt but always present against her skin. "You're thinking too hard," Axel said from across the booth they were sharing during her break. He looked more relaxed than she'd seen him in weeks, the constant tension finally eased after the resolution of the threat. Sophia looked up from the coffee she'd been staring into. Just wondering what happened to them. To those 3 men. Axel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Does it matter?" "I suppose not," Sophia admitted. "They made their choices. They have to live with the consequences." "They told us everything before they departed," Axel said carefully, using the euphemistic language that left the actual fate of the 3 assassins ambiguous. Sophia suspected she didn't want to know the specifics, and Axel was tactful enough not to share. "Rival club from Oregon, new outfit trying to expand into our territory. They thought taking out the Steel Riders' leadership would create a power vacuum they could exploit. They were wrong on multiple levels." He sipped his coffee, and Sophia noted that he'd gone back to his original order, black coffee, no sugar. The routine had been restored, but now it came with the knowledge that routines could be deadly, that predictability was a vulnerability. "Speaking of new arrangements," Axel continued, reaching into his jacket and withdrawing a small box. He slid it across the table toward Sophia. Inside the box, nestled on black velvet, was a medallion in the shape of the Steel Riders emblem, the snarling wolf's head over crossed bones rendered in silver with remarkable detail and craftsmanship. "What does this mean?" Sophia asked, though she suspected she already knew. "It means your family now," Axel said simply. "Not by blood, and not by the normal process of earning patches and proving yourself through years of loyalty. But by choice, by the bond created when you saved my life. You're under the protection of the Steel Riders for life. That protection comes with benefits but also with obligations." He leaned back, his expression serious. "It means you're safe. Nobody touches you without going through all of us. It means financial security, opportunities you wouldn't otherwise have. It means respect in certain circles, doors that will open for you. But it also means loyalty is expected, discretion is required, and you're part of this world now whether you want it to be or not." Sophia held the medallion, feeling the weight of it, the quality of the craftsmanship. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a symbol of protection and a mark that could make her a target, depending on who was looking. "And if I want to leave someday?" she asked, needing to know the boundaries of this new life. "If I decide this isn't what I want?" Axel's laugh was soft, not unkind, but tinged with a certain inevitability. "You stopped being a civilian the moment you whispered, 'Don't talk.' There's no undoing that, Sophia. The people who want to hurt me will always see you as someone under my protection, someone who matters to me. Leaving doesn't change that, doesn't make you any safer." He gestured around the newly secured cafe, at the subtle changes that had transformed it into something more than just a roadside diner. "But why would you want to leave? You have security now, purpose, a place in something larger than yourself. You're not invisible anymore, not just another waitress hoping to make rent. You matter here." Sophia looked around the junction through new eyes. The cafe was safer now, better protected. Marco smiled more, no longer worried about robberies or trouble. Beatrice had gotten a raise and new health insurance that covered her arthritis medication. The busboy Jamie was taking online classes, paid for by a scholarship that Axel had quietly arranged. The Steel Riders had claimed this place as theirs, and in doing so, had made everyone here safer, more secure, more prosperous. The waitressing job is yours for as long as you want it, Axel continued. But you'll have other responsibilities too. Sometimes I'll need you to listen, to watch, to be my eyes and ears in places where my guys would stand out. Your ability to notice things others miss, to pick up on dangerous undercurrents, that's valuable. You'll be compensated accordingly. Sophia touched the medallion, tracing the outline of the wolf's head with one finger. She thought about her old life, the cramped apartment where she'd lived paycheck to paycheck, the constant worry about bills and unexpected expenses, the feeling of being invisible and insignificant in a world that didn't care whether she existed or not. Now she was visible. Protected. Important. Dangerous in her own way. To good instincts, Axel said suddenly, raising his coffee cup in a toast that made Sophia's heart stop for a moment before she understood. This wasn't a careless repetition of the phrase that had almost gotten him killed. This was acknowledgement of how far they'd traveled, recognition of the journey that had started with those two whispered words and had led them here, to this new understanding and arrangement. She raised her cup to meet his. To good instincts. They drank together in the cafe where she'd saved his life and lost her old one, sealing a bond that would define whatever came next. It was a promise and a threat, a blessing and a curse, safety and danger intertwined so completely that they couldn't be separated. Outside, Highway 70 hummed with ordinary traffic, people going about their ordinary lives, oblivious to the extraordinary events that had unfolded at this unremarkable intersection. Inside, a waitress who was no longer just a waitress sat with a man who commanded an army, planning a future that would be anything but ordinary. Sophia had learned the most important rule of the world she'd stumbled into: once you were family forever. Whether that was a promise or a threat depended entirely on how you chose to see it. She chose to see it as both, with clear eyes and full understanding of what she'd gained and what she'd given up. The coffee was still black, no sugar, exactly the way Axel had always ordered it. But nothing else was the same. And Sophia found that she was okay with that. If this story has touched your heart, if it's reminded you of the power of observation and the importance of trusting your instincts, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Bike Diaries. We bring you stories that prove heroism comes in all forms, that courage isn't measured by size or age or position in life, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. Tell us in the comments, have you ever noticed something important that others missed? Have you ever had to make a split-second decision that changed the course of multiple lives? Your story might inspire someone else who's facing their own crossroads, their own moment of decision. Thank you for watching and reading. If this story reminded you to trust your instincts, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to never underestimate the power of paying attention to the world around you, please share it with others who might need to hear this message. Subscribe to Bike Diaries for more stories that prove heroes are everywhere, that courage comes in all forms, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room, the one everyone overlooks, can have the biggest impact when it matters most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Sophia's position? Would you have spoken up, risking everything to save a stranger? Or would you have stayed silent, protecting yourself above all else? There's no wrong answer, only honest reflection on who we are and who we want to be when faced with impossible choices. Until next time, ride safe, trust your instincts, and remember, you never know when your small action might save a life and change the world.